Greetings to everyone in the audience, wherever in the world you may be. I'm delighted on behalf of myself, Hayden Montgomery, and Nina Grasnick from the Global Research Alliance Secretariat to welcome you all to this expert panel, which will look at the power of many, enhancing climate change mitigation through agricultural research networks in times of pandemics. This panel is organised between the Global Research Alliance on Agricultural Greenhouse Gases, the Thuenen-Institute, and the University of Potsdam. First, before I'll pass to Nina to introduce you all to our panellists today, I would just like to provide a brief introduction to the GRA. And there's an awful lot to cover in this expert panel today, so my introduction will be brief, but hopefully you will join us all later in the deep dive sessions following this expert event, and we can go into more detailed discussions. Next slide, please. So what is the GRA, or the Global Research Alliance? It's a consortium of 64 member countries from all regions of the world. And together we aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector while ensuring adequate food production. We work through 4 research groups that look at livestock, croplands, and paddy rice emissions. And we also have an integrated group which covers cross-cutting issues like soil carbon, measurement, inventories, and modelling. The GRA provides a forum through which members and partners can develop collaborations, share information, and really it's about utilising the strength of many to accelerate progress in reducing greenhouse gases globally. So we seek to add value to existing initiatives, we try to avoid unnecessary duplication, and we look to carry out activities where the GRA members and partners are best placed to do so. And if we don't think we are, we'll leave it to others who are best placed to do so. Next slide. So you can see on this slide, we have a range of partner organisations, and these include development banks, both multilateral and regional, research and technical bodies. We also partner with other initiatives with common objectives, and with farmers' organisations and agribusiness. And the aim we have is to identify activities we can advance with our partners in keeping with the interests and the characteristics of each partner. So you can imagine a very diverse range of activities that we would undertake with these quite diverse organisations. Next slide, please. Now this is the kind of engine room of the GRA. These are our research networks. So within our research groups, we've created these networks and they focus on different scientific disciplines or other technical issues. And these networks are open to any interested individual from public or private sector, from any country, whether that be a member or not of the GRA, and any institution. And so this is where people can participate in networks in their own individual expert capacity. And it's through these networks where project ideas are developed and can be presented to the GRA research groups and to member countries for, hopefully, resourcing and implementation. This year, of course, in the world of COVID, our networks have been extremely busy organising a lot of online events, webinars and the like. And I'd just like to draw your attention to one that will be held on the 2nd of February that's been organised by our Manure Management Network, where they will present 2 multi-country projects that are linked to the GRA. And we will post details of this on the Slido Q&A so you can register for that event if you're interested. Next slide, please. In terms of the GRA, look, we're all about accelerating action. And so what I wanted to show on this slide is just the range of activities we promote through the GRA research groups and networks in order to assist our members to accelerate progress in a number of areas. And I just want to mention 3 today. One is the issue of capability or capacity. And we are acutely aware of the limitations in some countries of trained people and research infrastructure. And we have many programs to try and help address this. Some focus at master's level, some at PhD level, postdoctoral. We look at training technicians, policymakers and farmers. In terms of mitigation research, we try to identify research needs that are shared by our members, by as many as possible. And of course, the idea is that these research needs can be addressed by many. And the idea is working together to draw on the strengths of our different members and partners. And finally, the issue of measurement and estimation. National greenhouse gas inventories are critical tools for countries to plan their policies, and we try to support countries to improve these, moving over time to higher tiers, better quality data, and of course, in doing so, opening up possibilities for mitigation actions. I'll ask for the next slide, and I'll pass to Nina to carry on the introductions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Hayden. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Also a warm welcome from my side to the audience and especially to our panel guests who are all excellent researchers in the field of agricultural sciences and geology. And I would like to introduce first Dr. Klaus Deblitz, who will kick off the speakers' presentations. He's the Deputy Director of the Thuenen-Institute of Farm Economics and at the same time coordinates the global research network AgriBenchmark. Our second speaker today is Dr. Veronica Shiganda, who is a principal investigator at the National Institute for Agricultural Research, INIA, in Uruguay, and director of INIA's research program of production and environmental sustainability. After her presentation, we will turn to the European continent and listen to a presentation by Professor Salvador Carvé, who is Associate Professor and Head of the Institute of Animal Science and Technology at Universidad Politécnica de Valencia in Spain. He also coordinates the Spanish research network at Remedia. Last but not least, Professor Hubert Wiggering will complete the speakers' presentations by focusing on research activities in Germany. He holds a professorship for land sciences at Potsdam University and coordinates the German research network ClimAgrar. As we're only having a limited amount of time, our panel guests will not describe their research networks in detail, but you are more than welcome to watch their on-demand videos where we will share the links in the Slido chat to learn more about their networks. You are also warmly invited to ask your questions via Slido, which you can see on the right-hand side of the live stream. And if you ask a question, please identify the speaker your question is referring to. And we will provide written answers to all unanswered questions after the panel event, if possible. You are also warmly invited to meet all speakers and Hayden Montgomery after this panel event at 6 p.m. in a 36 minutes deep dive session. And to ask questions and participate in the deep dive session, you have to be registered, which you can still do now. But now we should start the presentations where the panel guests will answer the following two guiding questions. First, what are the main challenges faced in your region and field of research regarding mitigating agricultural greenhouse gases? And second, how can your research network help to address these challenges? Yeah, and with this, I would like to hand over to Klaus. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nina and Hayden, for introduction. At the moment, I cannot see my presentation. There it is. This presentation illustrates some results from work we have been doing within the AgriBenchmark network in South America. The focus is on what we call practice change analysis and the transition of traditional grazing situations towards more sustainable systems. I will give you a short overview on the challenges, on approaches, and some selected key results, and how all this fits into our global network. As you can see, we have been working with several local organizations on this. In Colombia, in Argentina, in Brazil, as well as in Mexico. Next slide, please. The three main challenges we are facing here is when we talk about grazing and pasture systems, we all know that many of them are not so well managed, resulting in the well-known farm level issues listed here. Beyond the farm level, there are more rather institutional issues. These are mainly the access to capital and the lack of know-how to implement and maintain systems with improved management. Finally, and maybe most important, we need the political will, good governance, and functioning institutions to support the implementation of better practices. So this has been the situation we have been facing in many situations. And now I would like to show you how we approach this. Next slide, please. Our approach in the AgriBenchmark network is a contribution basically to projects that we provide a framework, methodologies, data, and expertise to these projects. It means that we can draw from existing data, information, and experience and use it for projects and specific questions. At the same time, we enhance the value of the network through contributions coming from these specific projects. So it's a back and forth all the time. Our approach on the ground is to join forces with specialized institutions in the project regions and locations, as we can obviously not do everything by ourselves. We have excellent experience with this within the analysis of silvipastoral systems in the countries I mentioned. And we basically focus on we are specialized in production systems and the economics, and we then get the expertise on environment, on greenhouse gas measurements, and on animal welfare into the project. So far, we did 12 case studies in Colombia, Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico. And recently, we could add Paraguay to this country list. Next slide, please. In our projects, we apply our standardized methods, which include first a close cooperation with producers and advisors to collect and cross-check data and results. And we use our standard tools, which are updated regularly. Together with the local experts, we define baselines, scenarios, and calculate these for the transition phase, not just as a comparative analysis comparing 2 points in time. And this really proved to be extremely useful, given a transition phase that sometimes takes 10 years and more. Finally, we offer trainings for our partners to enable them to run own projects of such type. So all this allows us to reduce transaction costs and secure comparability within and between projects and years. Next slide, please. I have brought you some really small selected results here. This is for one of our beef finishing case study farm in the Caribbean region of Colombia, so very far in the north of Colombia. And it shows that we can have multiple wins with the introduction of silvipastoral systems. To various extents, these results is confirmed by the other case studies we did. One effect is the increase in the grass and forage yield, which results from a combination of the introduction of the rotational grazing system, allowing rest and regrowth periods for the grass, nitrogen accumulation and nutritious forage from the legume shrubs, and provision of shade through the trees. These elements allow higher stocking rates, a faster growth of cattle, and an increase of animal numbers. On the environmental side, one advantage is the reduction of greenhouse gases per kilogram meat produced. We could also show that animal welfare scores can be improved. And finally, the profitability increases significantly, in this case coming from a negative to a positive result. And it's important to say that investments at the beginning or during the period in terms of paddock, infrastructure, additional animals, etc., are all reflected in this. With these interventions, the potential for producing the same amount or even more on less or the same land is created. Whether this leads to, let's say, a reduction in land forest cutting or in the restoration of previously used land by agriculture depends heavily on the political and economic environment. Next slide, please. So this was a short overview of this type of research. I'm available for questions in the panel discussions and for the deep dive. There's a video, you see the link here, where with a nice movie which was done by World Animal Protection, who did the animal welfare analysis in this project. And yeah, my contact details, follow us on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Klaus, for providing insights into the AgriBenchmark work and also pointing out the importance of sustainable grazing systems worldwide. And now we will turn to Veronica, who shares her insights from the perspective of Latin America and the Caribbean on grazing systems as well as sustainable crop production. The floor is yours.
Good evening to everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this panel. I will briefly presenting you some of our thoughts regarding the mitigation of greenhouse gases from the agricultural sector in temperate region of Latin America. I am more familiar with what is happening in the south cone of Latin America, particularly in Uruguay, but I think that some of the concepts will also fit or partially fit to the tropical production systems. Next slide, please. Although our animal agriculture production systems are based on our native pastures, our main challenge is focused on the sustainable intensification of our beef, crop, and dairy production systems. Therefore, our main challenge is to enhance and expand our low-carbon agricultural systems. Particularly, we are interested in maximize carbon sequestration and increase soil carbon stocks up to each soil carbon saturation point or condition. Since methane emissions from enteric fermentation makes an important contribution to our global emissions, we also aim to mitigate emissions from ruminants. In addition, urine depositions in the soil from grazing ruminants is one of the main sources of N2O emissions. Therefore, the mitigations of the emissions from this source is relevant for us. Linked with the development of mitigation alternatives, we are also looking for country-specific emission factors that contribute, importantly, to improve our greenhouse gas inventories. Next slide. How do we approach research to obtain our greenhouse gas mitigation and carbon sequestration objectives? We put our research efforts with the final objectives of achieving the best management practices for the sustainable intensification of the agricultural production systems. In this sense, research work has been focused on soil conservation through increments in organic carbon, through better management of native and cultivated pastures, better crop pasture rotations, and also focus on decreasing carbon loss, avoiding soil tillage practices. When thinking in mitigation of enteric emissions, research has been developed through two approaches: the quality of the diet, improving both native and cultivated pastures quality, and using strategic supplementation, mainly winter supplementation. And on the other side, the approach of animal genomic selection to obtain low emitter animals. Under the paradigm of sustainable intensification, the improvement of livestock reproduction and productivity indicators are very strongly linked with greenhouse gas mitigation intensity. Therefore, many research efforts are focused on the improvement of indicators that contribute to a better performance of our systems. The optimization in the use of nitrogen fertilizers in crop production systems has been also an important objective to mitigate nitrous oxide emissions. However, under our conditions, production conditions, this is not a relevant source of N2O, as it is the nitrogen from urine patches from grazing ruminants. Nutrient recycling in crop pasture rotations and in dairy systems have also led some of our research efforts. Next slide, please. There have been several research network project initiatives in Latin America that have focused on the mitigation of greenhouse gases from the agricultural sector. Here in this slide, I'm showing you some of them that have been mainly funded by Fontagro, a Latin American research funding agency, and by the Ministry of Primary Industry from New Zealand. Also, it is important to state that the Global Research Alliance has been a key organization actor to promote these initiatives. As you can see, from 2012, many countries of Latin America have been part of different research initiatives, in which many of them have involved researchers from tropical and from temperate climate countries working together. These networks have been useful for capacity building and to develop country-specific emission factors for particular production conditions. Nevertheless, we think that we still need to improve scientific agreements among countries to facilitate exchange of methodologies within projects and other specific approaches of the projects. This year, an important research project will begin focused on identifying the soil carbon sequestration in several countries of Latin America. That is the soil carbon sequestration opportunities in Latin America and the Caribbean, and involves Uruguay, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, and Costa Rica. Next slide, please. The transfer of scientific knowledge and technology to farmers, policymakers, advisory technicians, and students is always a main objective. Also, very important, the technology adoption is a main challenge. There are different implementation actions, such as field days, seminars, workshops, used for the transfer of the technology. I want to remark, it is important to remark, that we have the experience at our institution of co-innovation projects, in which groups of farmers are involved in the development of the research, and are not just considered the final adopters. We think that sometimes this kind of approaches can improve technology adoption and lead to the acceleration in the implementation of mitigation alternatives. Next slide, please. Just to thank you for your attention, and I am open to questions.
Yeah, thank you, Veronica, for this great overview of ENIA and Fontagro research projects, which we probably can discuss also in more detail during the audience discussion. So at this point, I warmly invite the audience again to ask their questions in the Slido box next to the live stream. And with this, I want to hand over to Salva, who gives us deeper insights in the challenges of Spain.
Hi, good evening to everybody. Thank you for considering Red Remedia as a question to be presented here in this panel. Red Remedia is a scientific network in Spain, which aims to mitigate climate change in the agroforestry sector. Next slide, please. And we can identify many challenges in our activity, but probably the three most relevant that we identified when we started our network 8 years ago were these three. First of all, the diversity of production ecosystems in our country. I assume that is nothing specific of our country, but it has several particularities and it has to be considered. So diversity makes more difficult to consider all the possibilities for mitigation. Second is the need for a coordinated research. We realized that we are more than 20 research institutions, including universities, Agricultural Research Council, Scientific Research Council in Spain, and we try to gather together all the researchers working on this to develop multidisciplinary research. I think that's something very relevant, not only to be effective at a production system level, but also at an ecosystem level. And finally, the third one is about the policy. We identified that from science, we could deliver more useful science to be used in the political decisions. So at this moment, Red Remedia is a network of Spanish researchers across the country, also some researchers in Spanish researchers out of Spain. And we try to gather all this science together. Next slide, please. We developed a wide variety of activities, and I would like to highlight three of them. First of all, we try to develop high quality science, which is useful not only for science itself, but also for the producers and for researchers. And I provide here an example of collaboration between different researchers in our network and also researchers from other countries, developing an update, meta-analysis of nitrous oxide emissions from agricultural systems under Mediterranean conditions, which we observe that are considerably different, lower emissions than those reported in other kinds of crops and climate conditions. So that's relevant because this kind of information can be used in the national inventories or even considered in the revisions of the guidelines for greenhouse gas inventories. Next slide, please. A second example is the training we try to do regularly. It's important that this research arrives not only to researchers, but also to technicians in the working in the sectors, to producers, and also to policymakers. So we collaborate in any initiative to conduct this training. For example, this is an example of a course we organized together with other institutions. For example, GRA was also involved there. And in these years, this particular year of pandemics, it was possible to hold, we had to adapt to online format, and it was very well received. So I think we need to adapt to these possibilities. Next slide, please. And finally is outreach. As I mentioned, one of the things we try to do is to do science more accessible to the general public, to the society, to policymakers, to the producers. And I share with you a couple of examples we have. The first one is our blog. We have a blog in our website. You can see there the address to connect to the blog. And we develop any new or we summary any research article which may be relevant, and it's very much followed in Spain and other countries. And finally, we collaborate with sectors when they need it, and I can explain you later if you have any questions on how we started to work together with the beef sector in order to reduce their emissions. Next slide, please. And that's all from my side. I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm available if you have any more questions later. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Salva, for this overview of Red Media activities and especially the refinement of IPPC guidelines, which shows how evidence-based results turn into policy action. And maybe we can also discuss this later in more detail. And also emphasizes the power of many. And the power of many is also one of the main ideas of the research network Clim Agrar, which will be explained in more detail by Hubert now. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Nina. Yes, we are somehow in a strange everyday life. To deal with manifold challenges. And this is an excuse in the same way there's something wrong with the...
We have a very bad connection.
Yeah, I'm back again.
Yes.
Yes.
I started just to have a look onto or a short focus to the situation with the COVID-19. And it is just to mention that this is the same concerning the challenges, looking onto the situation about climate change. And the previous presentations have shown how serious the situation within this context is. And it has been shown that agriculture is concerned by climate change and vice versa, that agriculture has to contribute in solving the upcoming problems referring to this. And what I learned is, as a good message, research can enable the agricultural sector to deliver, to contribute to this situation. And next slide, please. Here's with this sketch, it's shown, or is just to give a reminder that agriculture is particularly responsible for the emissions of the greenhouse gases, nitrous oxide. Look onto the trend, how we still do have a slight increase of emissions of N2O, foremost due to the arable farming, and the same with CH4 due to the livestock farming, while the situation within the context of land use change is somehow changeful. But it also shows that there is no reason to slow down any engagement against climate change mitigation. Much more, the recent COVID-19 situation might exemplify that transformation processes are feasible. But this sketch also shows that we shouldn't any longer decouple arable farming and livestocking farming. It's just an invitation to go into this next step, a new generation of mixed farming, and to look forward to solve the problems within this context much better. The next slide, please. Yes, the power of many. It is somehow in demand, and what to deal a little bit more with the networking itself, that we need a new quality of networking to handle the situation, means to embellish such transformation processes, to create new strong research networks, and to establish new experimental areas, new options for experimentation. And within this sketch over here in the background, you see a cloud with a cluster of technical terms. These are so-called controlled vocabularies, and based on these controlled vocabulary, we use search routines to link research activities all over Germany. And if we click on one of these terms, for example, on precision farming, we immediately do have the information about such projects dealing with precision farming and climate change mitigation. And it's also a tool to provoke new collaborations between these projects, and also a basis for transfer of results into practice and policy, because also politicians, farmers can log in and can get this information exclusively. May I have the next slide, please? Further on, digitalization within agriculture is a key to make networks more efficient. There is, due to digitalization, there is this opportunity to create a new quality of data platforms with data from different sources. For example, looking onto a really new quality concerning the exchange or share of data between researchers and farmers. But also there is a completely new access to new sensor systems using new options of remote sensing, new developments concerning regional-based so-called resilient cloud technologies with edge devices, etc., etc. From my point of view, this is a door opener to step more and more into the discussion how to deal with complex systems and to support to the requirements to deal with systemic approaches. This sketch over here shows how we can design new complex research areas and also to establish more comprehensive research within these fields and to design new agricultural landscapes climate change mitigation is an integrated component of these comprehensive systems. And against this background, shifting from precision farming more going into a against this background, a pipe dream, it is achievable. And if I could have the next slide. May I have the next slide, please? And this is just to invite you to visit our website and to say thanks for your for listening. And I'm also happy if you would join the deep diving and if we could get into an intensive discussion now. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you, Hubert, very much for your presentation, and thank you to all of the panelists for your contributions. I'll just remind our audience to please don't be shy to jump on Slido and propose some questions. We have some questions, which is good. And so I'll just, if I can, juggle the screens. I'll direct this question to Salva, and it's about the network Remedia. And the question is from Claudia Heidecke, wondering whether the network Remedia is also involved directly in policy making at a national level.
Well, we have collaborated with our ministry in several parts. So some members of our network are active in revising the methodologies to calculate emissions from livestock, from agricultural sources. We also try to develop country-specific emission factors, which has not been possible yet at the moment. But yes, we try to be active. So we open our knowledge to them, and we sometimes collaborate in that way. It's not always so easy because from science to policymakers is a very large gap. But well, we had some experience already in this kind of collaboration. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you, Salva. I have another question here from the chat from Carla Schulte-Fischedick, and she asked where she could find the best link to make more known the results of your research networks, to use it, for example, for other researchers or farmers, etc. So also like how to get engaged with your research networks. Maybe that's a question to all of you. We could start with Klaus, then Veronika, Salva, and Hubert.
Yes, thanks for the question. And yeah, I think on my last slide, there was our website, which is the agribenchmark.org website. There you can see the results for not just for beef, but also for the other branches we are operating. And of course, feel free to contact us. And as I said, some of the results are also published on LinkedIn at the hashtag of agribenchmark.
This is the same with us. You are kindly invited to visit our website and to join in. And further on, there are more than 30, sometimes another 50 projects within this network. And within these projects, there is always many activity concerning a new quality of farmers' fora, that there is a discussion forum with the farmers or with politicians, and these are open space approaches, so that you are kindly invited to join in.
I may add from Red Remedia that it's a scientific network, and we organize just any scientist related to agriculture, to livestock production, to forestry sectors. Any researcher is very welcome to our network. It's true that our network is mainly in Spanish, so it's very convenient, for example, for Latin American countries, which already had other kind of networks, of course, but it's the way we operate normally.
Okay, and I think it's a good, in the case of the research network initiatives that I showed you in the presentation, a good way to access to those are in the Fontagro website, where you can find information of each of the projects that it's funded by Fontagro, with a lot of details of the projects that are running now and the projects that are already closed, showing the results. So it's good to visit the Fontagro website to see all those initiatives.
Great, thank you all. I see in the question and answers there's another question which I might just quickly answer before addressing another one. And I think it's largely been answered by the recent responses from our panelists. And it's about how can an NGO with limited resources partner with researchers to assess the outcomes of their agroecology extension program that increases soil carbon, biodiversity, and other aspects of farming. So I would say, as has been explained, there are many ways to contact researchers through these different networks. And I would just add that within the Global Research Alliance, we also have the networks I mentioned in the opening presentation, all of which are open to anyone to join. And the contact details of most of those network coordinators was provided on that slide. And if in doubt, you can always contact us through the Global Research Alliance website. I'll just take a question here. There are actually two questions to Veronica. I might just combine them. So one is, how do you ensure a reduction in total emissions of ruminants in the Latin American Caribbean region under sustainable intensification? And then a very specific question about a practice, which is liquid animal slurry instead of solid animal manure also a major part of livestock farming in Latin America? Veronica, please.
Sorry, Hayden, can you repeat the last part of the question?
The last question was specifically about liquid animal slurry and whether that is also used as in the context of livestock farming in Latin America, in addition to solid animal manure. So that the practice of, I assume, spreading liquid animal slurry. Okay,
I can talk about the situation of Uruguay. Actually, that would be the manure management, emissions from manure. It's really not as important as the importance of the nitrous oxide emissions from the nitrogen from the urine patches. Our systems are more extensive, open air extensive, so emissions from manure are really not an important source of emissions in our, they are not responsible for our emissions in our inventories. The main emissions, the responsible sectors is the enteric fermentation, and then the N2O from the nitrogen from ruminants in the soil, they're not from the manure. That would be, maybe it is important within the dairy sector of our country, but at the same time, the dairy sector is the animals is less than 1 million of animals in the dairy sector, so it's not really an important factor for us.
Thank you, Veronica. I have another question here from Pradeep Day, and I would give it to Klaus. The question is how to optimize livestock farming with regard to the Sustainability Development Goal 13, which is take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. I think this relates good to your presentation and the work you've done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I understand the question more in a way that how can we make a quick progress. And that also, of course, depends very much how we can transfer evidence-based research into policy action. And I think that first of all, well, I mean, a sarcastic point on this would be to say skip the livestock, but I think we are actually, we mostly agree that livestock should be part of the solution and can be. I think first of all, we need to get the ear of politicians and decision makers. So we have to make them understand how agriculture is basically working. Because very often they don't really know about this very much. I think in a more practical way, I'm quite convinced that if we can set up best practice showcase farms and organize field trips for not just for producers but also for the public and politicians, that would be a good thing. And producers, they tend to believe what they can see and what others have successfully implemented. We also, from the political side, I think we need to, in many countries, it would be necessary to set up investment schemes to cover the initial expenses for the establishment of sustainable systems. And finally, I think we also need to re-establish or strengthen public extension work in cooperation with innovative businesses. Because in many countries, it seems to me that the public extension services are basically fading or not existing anymore.
Thank you, Klaus. Look, we have another question from Dr. Alioune Fall, one of our colleagues in Senegal, and it's a very good question. The question is that the majority of the beneficiaries of your research do not access the internet. What to do? I would make one comment from perspective of the Global Research Alliance, and then maybe ask Salva for a reaction. I guess from our perspective in a global forum like the Global Research Alliance, it's never going to be practicable for the GRA to be out there in the field with farmers, right? So we have to rely on the members we have, our own country members, and their own ministries and research organizations and extension organizations, and also, of course, the very significant number of partners that I mentioned in one of the slides, many of which are directly farmers themselves or working with farmers through the supply chain in the case of some agribusinesses. So I guess, we try to make information accessible. We try to increase the volume of good information being produced by the scientific community. And then we very much have to work with our members and partners to extend that further and closer to those other actors, as you've said, many of whom do not necessarily have access to the internet. Salva, do you have any reactions to that from your experience in Spain? And you talked about the diversity, and I guess you have smallholders as well in different regions. Any comment there?
Yes, well, we are a scientific network, and we normally focus the problem that we are researchers. So it's probably not one of our most relevant points to be active in policymakers, for producers to reach the sectors. So that's something I can see that it's wrong, because we, as a scientist, we already have a responsibility to make our research go into the practical conditions for policymakers, for producers. So I think that's something we need to improve. And it's true that it depends many in the institutional situation of every country or different regions, but also in the scientists may be more active or less active in this kind of innovation activities and transfer activities.
Yes, thank you, Salva, to highlight the importance of finding ways to transfer research results into policy action. And I think this is also something Hubert mentioned in his presentation when he was talking about finding innovative ways to transfer research results into action. Hubert, could you maybe provide one or two best practice examples here, maybe also from the Climagra network?
Yeah, I will try my very best, but there is always some problem with the internet connection over here. Nevertheless, yes, innovative ways how to handle this. And by experiences, it is so that if you do have pressure groups with you, this always is an advantage to push this business to get more step by step into the political discussion. This means that, for example, farmers themselves should be much more involved within this research, that we need new formats how to involve them and to establish a really on-farm research, not only having research sites within the research centers somewhere, and being really having really an intensive exchange with these farmers and having common results over there. This is much more evident for a political discussion instead of having all these activities going for research results first, discussing them within the scientific context, discussing them with politicians, going back to the farmers. We can shorten this discussion much more with such a new format, having experimental fields. Experiences within research. But, Klaus mentioned already that we have to have much more acceptance looking onto all stakeholders, all players within this game. And we see this discussing these hotspots of livestock husbandry in Germany, that we probably have to discuss to change all these regions over there to have not these concentrations in these only very fields like in the northwestern part of Germany, but have it scattered much more all over Germany. And Klaus was mentioning to reduce the number of animals. This is on the one hand one discussion, but having this discussion about hotspots and looking onto this experiences, scattering them much more into the space, into all over Germany. So there is much more acceptance, and this is a completely different discussions about livestock farming and new approaches, and also having discussions about sink and sources and how we can change the system completely into such a direction, going into a climate neutral agriculture.
Thank you. Veronica, I have a question for you. In your presentation, you identified a series of projects that have been undertaken in the region and some that are just beginning. Is there one in particular you could perhaps just shed a little bit more light on in terms of the kind of results you got and maybe the benefits of the multi-partner approach and how that worked in that particular example?
Yes, I can mention particularly the first that I show you. It's a project that we carried out together in 5 countries. It was Uruguay, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, and Dominican Republic. So you can see that there were countries from the South Cone and from Central America, and also Colombia in the north of South America, that we really have very, very different production situations. So it's very interesting to be together in one project from those different situations. And I think, and I would highlight that from that project that started in 2012, when really few countries in Latin America were already measuring greenhouse gases, it was very useful to share methodologies, both for measuring N2O emissions and enteric emissions using the SF6 technique. So some countries that we have very little experience, but we were already measuring gases, we were able through that project to transfer knowledge to researchers from other countries to start with measurements in both gases. So I think that the human resources capacity building, it's a main result of that project. It was a very good interaction, and also the scientific itself results that we developed some specific emission factors for N2O emissions. It was focused on grazing, ruminant grazing systems, so we developed emission factors for N2O, and also we measure and develop emission factors in some of the countries for methane emissions. So I think it was very, very valuable. And also the capacity building in terms of laboratories, it was a very useful project and network to improve and to establish and to settle some of our lab capacities.
Thank you, Veronica. I think we have time for one last question before we do the wrap up. And I'm not sure, Klaus, if you could answer it, because if I remember, AgriBenchmark also works in the aquaculture sector. Is this correct? Because here's the question that this might be a bit maybe off topic, but what about managing fish manure from aquaculture? Is there any research done in general and specifically Atlantic salmon farming?
Thank you for the question. This is definitely beyond my competence, but whoever asked the question, please send me an email and I will try to connect you with my colleagues from the fishery institutes.
Okay, thank you.
Right, thanks, Klaus. Yeah, it was beyond my knowledge as well in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So look, that brings us to the almost the end of our session. Again, quickly to remind our audience, we have the deep dive sessions, and all of the panelists, myself, we're making ourselves available to talk about whatever you want to talk about. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and I want to thank our panelists especially for participating today. I just want to touch on a few points just to highlight some of the things I heard. And of course, if people disagree, then feel free to use Slido or join us in the deep dive. I guess one area is this science policy, and I would add to that political interface is obviously very important to allow change on the ground. And in this respect, as a number mentioned, the accessibility of the science is really crucial so that it can get to the right people to make decisions and also be, I guess, influential, right, in the decisions they take. I think you can see from the presentations that we're all, to use the AgriBenchmark slogan, we're all passionate about facts. And we recognise the usefulness of good data to inform decisions. And you can see the large efforts that have been going on in different countries and different regions and in different sectors to improve data so that farmers and policymakers and other actors can make better decisions, particularly in addressing climate change. The issue of diversity has been raised, and it has been raised in the context of a challenge, but you can also see that it's a strength when considering how diverse experience can help inform others. And also, as Veronica just mentioned, the diversity of capabilities is helpful to those who have an opportunity to learn from others in the same or in different regions. And finally, the presentation from Hubert, where he talked about the quality of networking and the need for us to find a higher quality of networking. And I guess this applies within the science community as well as between the different actors in the innovation and knowledge transfer process. One example in this respect was given around co-innovation. That is involving farmers as part of the design of the research activity, not just as the end user. That's a very good example, and I know it's been successful in a number of different countries. So, of course, there are many ways to improve the quality of our networking, and hopefully you can see all of you today maybe opportunities for you to interact with some or one of our networks that we presented. So please, look, we invite you to join us in the deep dive sessions. You should have been provided links to access the deep dive sessions you've registered for. Our speakers, our panelists have been given links for their sessions. So hopefully we'll meet very soon there. Thanks again.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Pleasure.